What happens when you bring your new trophy wife to the most exclusive criminal gathering in the city, only to discover your ex-girlfriend, the black woman you left because she wasn't ambitious enough, is now the untouchable queen of the underworld? Desmond Cartwright thought he'd made the smart choice 3 years ago when he left Joan O'Neill for Valentina Ashcroft, a blonde socialite with the right connections and the right pedigree. Joan had been a struggling artist, barely making rent, with big dreams, but no practical plan. Valentina was already established, already connected, already the kind of woman who could elevate his legitimate business empire. Desmond had framed it as a business decision, not a betrayal. He'd even convinced himself he was being kind by ending things cleanly instead of stringing Joan along. So when Desmond received an invitation to the Crimson Veil Gala, the annual gathering where the city's most powerful criminal enterprises negotiated territory, formed alliances, and displayed their dominance, he saw it as his official entry into the upper echelon of power. He'd worked for years to get legitimate business connections to the underworld. This invitation meant he'd arrived. He brought Valentina as his plus one, dressed her in a fortune of diamonds, and walked into that ballroom with the confidence of a man who'd made all the right choices. Then he saw Joan, not struggling, not invisible, not the woman he'd left behind. Joan O'Neill stood at the center of the room wearing a dress that cost more than Desmond's car, dripping in jewelry that screamed old money and new power, laughing at something that Frederick Griffin, the most feared Mafia boss in 3 states, had whispered in her ear. And when Frederick Griffin, the man who controlled half the city's criminal infrastructure, pulled Joan close and kissed her in front of everyone with the possessive confidence of someone claiming what was his, Desmond's entire world tilted. Because Joan didn't look surprised, didn't look uncomfortable, looked like a woman who'd been kissed by dangerous men in expensive ballrooms her entire life. Like she belonged there. Like she'd always belonged there. And when Joan's eyes met Desmond's across that crowded room, she smiled. Not the sweet, uncertain smile he remembered, but something sharper, colder, infinitely more dangerous. The smile of a woman who'd upgraded so spectacularly that her ex-boyfriend's new wife looked like a downgrade by comparison. Desmond had thought he was entering the underworld elite. Instead, he'd just walked into his ex-girlfriend's kingdom, and she was about to remind him exactly what he'd thrown away. Think this is just about an ex getting a glow-up? You're missing several conspiracies. Because what Desmond doesn't know is that Joan was never a struggling artist. She's the hidden daughter of the O'Neill crime family, who went into hiding after a rival family tried to assassinate her entire bloodline. What Joan doesn't know is that Desmond didn't just leave her for Valentina. He was paid $2 million by the Ashcroft family to break her heart and keep her isolated during a critical period when her family was being systematically destroyed. Hit subscribe, because this story is about to reveal that sometimes being left for a better option is the best thing that ever happened to you. Sometimes the struggling artist was actually a hidden mafia princess, and sometimes revenge is a dish best served at a gala in front of everyone who thought you'd been defeated. The Crimson Veil Gala was held in a converted cathedral that the city's underworld had purchased decades ago and transformed into a temple of a different kind. Desmond Cartwright adjusted his cufflinks for the 3rd time, trying to calm nerves he'd never admit to having. This invitation had cost him 2 years of careful networking, strategic favors, and proving he could be useful to people who didn't tolerate uselessness. "You're fidgeting," Valentina observed from beside him, her tone carrying the mild disapproval of someone who'd been raised in circles where displaying nervousness was a social crime. "I'm fine," Desmond replied, forcing his hands to stillness. They stood in line with other couples waiting to be announced. A who's who of the city's criminal elite and the legitimate business people who'd learned to profit from proximity to power without getting their hands too dirty. Desmond had worked hard to position himself in that second category. "Remember," Valentina murmured as they approached the entrance, "don't stare at anyone too directly. Don't ask intrusive questions. And absolutely don't mention law enforcement, politics, or anything that could be construed as a threat." Desmond had been briefed on Crimson Veil etiquette extensively. The gala operated under strict rules. What happened here stayed here. Conflicts were forbidden on the premises, and everyone was granted temporary immunity from whatever rivalries existed outside these walls. It was neutral ground, sacred ground, in its way. They were announced, Desmond Cartwright and Valentina Ashcroft. The ballroom opened before them like something from a different century. Vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and enough wealth concentrated in one room to fund a small country. Men in custom suits that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Women dripping in jewelry that represented power, territory, and blood. Desmond had never felt more like an outsider trying to fake belonging. "There's Salvatore Delacroix," Valentina said quietly, nodding subtly toward a silver-haired man surrounded by armed bodyguards. "He controls the dock territories. Don't approach him. He doesn't take meetings at social events." Desmond nodded, cataloging faces and names, trying to remember the complex web of alliances and rivalries that Valentina had made him memorize. "And that's Vivian Blackthorne," Valentina continued, indicating a severe-looking woman in her 50s. "She runs the gambling operations in the financial district. Very traditional, very particular about respect protocols." They moved deeper into the ballroom, accepting champagne from servers who were definitely armed beneath their formal attire, making polite small talk with other couples who were assessing whether Desmond and Valentina were useful, threatening, or irrelevant. Desmond was starting to relax. He could do this. He'd built a successful import-export business by reading people and adapting to different social contexts. This was just another networking event, albeit one where the stakes were considerably higher. Then the energy in the room shifted. Conversation didn't stop exactly, but it changed, became more alert, more focused. People turned toward the main entrance where someone important was clearly arriving. "Frederick Griffin," Valentina breathed, her usual composure cracking slightly. Desmond had heard of Frederick Griffin. Everyone in the city had heard of Frederick Griffin. He'd consolidated power over the past 5 years with a combination of strategic brilliance and ruthless violence that made even established families cautious. At 38, he controlled territory that typically took generations to accumulate. Approaching him without invitation was considered suicidal. Insulting him was just suicide with extra steps. Griffin entered the ballroom with the kind of presence that made everyone else seem like background extras in his personal film. Tall, built like someone who'd done his own violence before delegating it to others, with dark hair and eyes that assessed everything and revealed nothing. He wore power like other men wore cologne, saturating the space around him, impossible to ignore. But it wasn't Griffin who made Desmond's champagne glass slip from his suddenly nerveless fingers. It was the woman on his arm. Joan O'Neill, his ex-girlfriend. The woman he'd left 3 years ago because she was going nowhere, doing nothing, would never be anything more than a struggling artist with expensive dreams and an empty bank account. Except the woman walking beside Frederick Griffin didn't look like the Joan he remembered. Joan had shopped at thrift stores and worn her natural hair in styles that required minimal product because she couldn't afford salon visits. That Joan had worked 3 jobs to pay for a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood. That Joan had talked about her art like it mattered more than practical concerns like financial stability. This Joan wore a dress that Desmond's trained eye recognized as couture. The kind you didn't buy off the rack, the kind that required fittings and cost more than most people's annual salaries. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement. Her makeup was flawless, professional, expensive. She looked like she'd been born to stand beside the most powerful man in the room. Looked like she belonged in this ballroom full of criminals and power brokers. Looked like she'd never struggled a day in her life. Desmond's brain couldn't reconcile the 2 versions of Joan, the woman he'd left and the woman currently being escorted through the Crimson Veil Gala like royalty. "Who was that?" Valentina asked, her voice tight with something Desmond couldn't quite identify. I don't know," Desmond lied automatically. But he did know. He knew the curve of her face, the way she moved, the particular tilt of her head when she was listening to someone. Those things hadn't changed. Everything else had. Griffin was introducing Joan to various power players. Salvatore Delacroix actually smiled when greeting her, which Valentina had said was rare. Vivian Blackthorne embraced her like an old friend. Other family heads gravitated toward her with the kind of respect usually reserved for equals. She must be someone important, Valentina murmured, watching with the analytical focus Desmond recognized from her business negotiations. Very important, to be here with Griffin. I've never seen her at any of these events before. Because you've only been attending for 2 years, Desmond thought. And Joan disappeared from my life 3 years ago. The timing felt significant, though Desmond couldn't articulate why. Joan was laughing at something Salvatore had said, her hand resting comfortably on Griffin's arm like she'd been there 1,000 times before. She looked relaxed. Confidence. Completely at home in a gathering that Desmond was barely managing to fake his way through. Griffin leaned down and whispered something in Joan's ear. She smiled. Not the uncertain, hopeful smile Desmond remembered, but something sharper, more knowing. Then Griffin's hand moved to Joan's waist, pulling her closer with the possessive confidence of someone who had every right to touch her. The gesture was both protective and claiming, broadcasting to everyone watching that Joan O'Neill was his. And Joan leaned into it. Into him. Like she belonged there. Like this was normal. Like being claimed by the most dangerous man in the city was just another Tuesday. Desmond's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't possible. Joan had been nobody. Had been nothing. Had been a failed artist who couldn't even afford her own art supplies half the time. How the hell was she here? How was she with Frederick Griffin? How was she wearing diamonds that probably cost more than Desmond had paid for Valentina's engagement ring? He needed answers. Needed to understand what he was seeing. Against every instinct screaming at him to stay away, Desmond started walking toward Joan and Griffin. Valentina grabbed his arm. What are you doing? I need to. I just want to. Desmond couldn't explain the compulsion driving him forward. Desmond, that's Frederick Griffin. You don't just approach him without. But Desmond was already moving, weaving through the crowd, driven by something he couldn't name. Shock, confusion, anger that Joan had somehow ended up here, in his world, his opportunity, his moment. He was 10 feet away when Joan's eyes met his. Recognition flared immediately. No surprise, no shock, just cool acknowledgement, like she'd known exactly where he was in the ballroom this entire time. And then Frederick Griffin, who'd been deep in conversation with someone Desmond didn't recognize, turned his attention to Joan. Read something in her expression or body language that made him follow her gaze directly to Desmond. The look Griffin gave him was absolutely arctic. Desmond stopped walking like he'd hit a physical wall. Griffin turned back to Joan, murmured something Desmond couldn't hear, and then, in front of 300 witnesses, in the middle of the Crimson Veil Gala, with calculated deliberation, pulled Joan close and kissed her. Not a polite social kiss. Not a brief display of affection. A claiming kiss. A possessive, public declaration that Joan O'Neill belonged to Frederick Griffin, and everyone in this room had better remember it. When they separated, Joan's eyes were still on Desmond. And she smiled. Not the warm smile he remembered from their relationship. Not the sad smile she'd given him when he'd ended things 3 years ago, telling her he needed someone more practical, more established, more useful to his career. This smile was pure triumph, pure satisfaction at watching him realize exactly what he'd lost. The smile of a woman who'd upgraded so spectacularly that her ex's new wife looked like a tragic downgrade by comparison. Desmond stood frozen in the middle of the Crimson Veil Gala, his new wife somewhere behind him, his entire understanding of reality crumbling, while his ex-girlfriend, who'd been nobody, nothing, worthless, stood beside the most powerful criminal in 3 states and looked at him like he was something she'd scraped off her designer shoe. Desmond, Valentina's voice was tight. Do you know her? Did he know her? He'd dated her for 2 years. Had told her he loved her. Had promised her a future right up until he decided she was holding him back from the success he deserved. No, Desmond heard himself say. I've never seen her before in my life. Through the crowd, past dozens of dangerous people, across a ballroom that suddenly felt like enemy territory, Joan's smile widened. She knew he was lying, and she didn't care, because in this room, at this event, surrounded by the city's criminal elite, Joan O'Neill had power that Desmond could never touch. She'd won, and he hadn't even known they were playing. Desmond retreated from the center of the ballroom like a man who'd just seen a ghost, Valentina following with sharp questions he couldn't answer yet. "You're lying," Valentina said once they'd found a relatively private corner. "You do know that woman. Your entire body language changed when you saw her." "Drop it," Desmond said, his voice harsher than intended. Through the crowd, he could still see Joan, laughing with Vivian Blackthorne, accepting a kiss on both cheeks from Salvatore Delacroix, moving through this gathering of criminals and power brokers like she'd been doing it her entire life. How was this possible? 3 years ago, Joan had been living in a studio apartment in Riverside, one of the city's worst neighborhoods. She'd worked 3 jobs: morning shift at a coffee shop, afternoon at a gallery that paid minimum wage, nights doing freelance design work for clients who barely paid. Her art career had been more aspiration than reality, existing mainly in sketchbooks filled with drawings she'd never had the resources to actually produce. Desmond had loved her, or thought he had, but love didn't pay bills, didn't build empires, didn't open doors to the kind of power Desmond craved. So when Valentina Ashcroft had shown interest, beautiful, connected, already established, Desmond had made what he'd convinced himself was a practical choice. He'd told Joan she was amazing, but they wanted different things. That he needed someone who understood his ambitions, who could help him build instead of holding him back with impractical dreams. Joan had taken it quietly, too quietly, had just nodded, thanked him for his honesty, and walked away without the tears or arguments he'd been bracing for. He'd told himself it proved they weren't right for each other, that Joan had never really loved him, or she would have fought harder. Now, watching her beside Frederick Griffin, Desmond wondered if she'd just known she was better off without him. "We're leaving," Valentina decided. This was clearly a mistake. "You're not ready for this level of—" "No." Desmond straightened his spine. "We're staying. I worked too hard to get this invitation. I'm not running because my ex-girlfriend happened to show up." "That's Frederick Griffin's woman," Valentina hissed. "Not just your ex-girlfriend. If he thinks you're disrespecting her by—" "I'm not doing anything. I'm just attending a gala I was invited to." But Desmond couldn't stop watching Joan. The evening progressed with painful slowness. Desmond tried to network, tried to make valuable connections, but his attention kept drifting to Joan. She was everywhere, dancing with Griffin, deep in conversation with family heads, laughing at private jokes with people who could have Desmond killed with a phone call. And Griffin? Griffin was possessive in ways that made Desmond's chest tight. His hand stayed on Joan's waist, her back, the small of her spine. Constant contact, constant claiming, broadcasting to everyone that Joan was his, and attempting to approach her would be a terminal mistake. Around midnight, Desmond found himself near the bar at the same moment Joan approached for a drink. They were alone for the first time in 3 years. "Hello, Desmond," Joan said, her voice exactly as he remembered, but her tone completely different. "I was wondering when you'd work up the courage to actually speak to me instead of just staring." "Joan," his voice came out rough. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited." "Same as you." She accepted champagne from the bartender with a smile that suggested they knew each other. "Though I suspect my invitation was slightly less difficult to obtain. You're with Frederick Griffin." Very observant. Joan's amusement was clear. "Is that a question or an observation?" "How?" "You were. 3 years ago you couldn't even afford." "Afford what?" "My own life. My own choices." Joan's smile didn't waver, but something cold entered her eyes. "You're right. 3 years ago, I couldn't afford much. Now I can afford anything I want. Funny how things change. Did you know he'd be here? Is that why you—" "Why I what, Desmond?" "Why I came to a gala I've been attending for the past year." Joan sipped her champagne. "Did you think this was your exclusive world? That I couldn't possibly exist in the same spaces as you? That's not. I just didn't know you were involved with." "You don't know anything about me," Joan interrupted. "You knew the version I allowed you to see. You never asked the right questions. Never looked deeper than surface struggle." Frederick Griffin materialized beside Joan with the silent efficiency of a predator. Up close, he was even more intimidating, taller than Desmond by several inches, built like someone who'd personally enforced his own rules, with eyes that assessed and dismissed Desmond in a single glance. Joan, Griffin said, his hand sliding possessively around her waist. Who's your friend? Not a friend, Joan replied easily. Just someone I used to know. Desmond Cartwright. He owns some import-export businesses. Legitimate ones. The emphasis on legitimate carried subtle mockery. Desmond Cartwright, Griffin repeated, like he was filing the name for later consideration. The one who married Valentina Ashcroft 6 months ago. Interesting choice of wife. Desmond's mouth went dry. Griffin had looked into him. Had enough interest to know about his marriage. Valentina's very practical, Desmond managed. Practical, Griffin echoed. Yes, the Ashcroft family values practicality. Among other things. His attention shifted back to Joan. We should make our rounds. Salvatore wants to discuss the dock situation. Of course. Joan set down her champagne and smiled at Desmond one more time. It was lovely seeing you again, Desmond. Please give my regards to your wife. I'm sure she's lovely. They walked away, Griffin's hand never leaving Joan's body, and Desmond was left with champagne he didn't want and questions multiplying in his mind. The Ashcroft family values practicality. Among other things. What did that mean? Why had Griffin emphasized it like that? Desmond found Valentina networking with a group of wives and mistresses, all of them navigating the complex social dynamics of women connected to dangerous men. We need to talk, Desmond said quietly. About Joan. About what she's doing here. Valentina's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Not here. Not now. We'll discuss it at home. Valentina. I said not now. Her voice carried warning. You're already drawing attention we don't need. Finish your networking, and we'll leave within the hour. But Desmond couldn't focus on networking. Couldn't focus on anything except Joan's smile, Griffin's possessive hands, and the growing certainty that he was missing something crucial. Something that would explain how the woman he'd left for being worthless had become untouchable. So Desmond brought his practical new wife to a criminal gala thinking he'd finally made it into the big leagues. Adorable. Discovered his ex-girlfriend is dating the most dangerous man in the city. Awkward. And learned that Joan has been casually attending these exclusive events for a year while he was still trying to get his first invitation. Embarrassing. Also, Frederick Griffin definitely knows who Desmond is and looked at him like something that needs to be eliminated, which seems problematic for Desmond's life expectancy. Subscribe now, because what comes after this involves Desmond discovering why Valentina's family name made Frederick smile coldly. Joan revealing she knows exactly why Desmond left her 3 years ago, and everyone learning that the struggling artist's backstory was a cover for something much more dangerous. Desmond couldn't sleep that night. He lay beside Valentina in their penthouse bedroom, a space decorated with her money, her taste, her complete control, and tried to make sense of what he'd witnessed. Joan with Frederick Griffin. Joan wearing diamonds worth more than Desmond's annual income. Joan was comfortable in a world that terrified most people. It didn't make sense. There had to be an explanation. Some logical progression from struggling artist to mafia girlfriend that Desmond was missing. Around 3 a.m., he gave up on sleep and went to his office. If Joan had somehow climbed the social ladder that dramatically, there would be traces. Records. Evidence of how she'd made the transition. He started with basic searches. Joan O'Neill. Nothing new came up that he didn't already know. A few mentions in art blogs from years ago. A Facebook profile that hadn't been updated in over 3 years. Some tagged photos from galleries she'd worked at. Then he tried searching Joan O'Neill plus Frederick Griffin. Nothing. No photos together. No mentions. Like their relationship didn't exist in any documented form. Strange. Griffin was photographed constantly, attending events, conducting business, making appearances that reinforced his power. But there were no pictures of him with Joan anywhere Desmond could find. Like she'd been deliberately kept invisible until last night's very public debut. Desmond expanded his search. Frederick Griffin plus relationships. Griffin plus girlfriend. Griffin plus partner. Hours of digging revealed that Griffin was notoriously private about his personal life. No confirmed relationships. No public appearances with women beyond professional necessity. Until Joan. Desmond tried a different angle. He pulled up property records for the city, searching for Joan's name. Maybe she'd bought property with Griffin's money. Maybe there'd be evidence of financial transactions. Nothing under Joan O'Neill. But there was something under a different name that made Desmond's breath catch. Property records for a penthouse in the Diamond District, one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods, showed a recent transfer to Joan Anastasia O'Neill. Not Joan O'Neill. Joan Anastasia O'Neill. Desmond didn't remember Joan ever using a middle name. He dug deeper into that property record. The previous owner was listed as O'Neill Family Trust. O'Neill Family Trust. Desmond searched that term and found something that made his hands shake. The O'Neill crime family. Major players in the city's underworld 20 years ago. Controlled gambling, smuggling, and protection rackets across 3 territories. They'd been wiped out 15 years ago in what news articles called the O'Neill Massacre. Every major family member killed in coordinated attacks across a single bloody week. The family's assets seized, territories redistributed, bloodline effectively extinct. Except according to property records, the O'Neill Family Trust still existed, still held assets, and had recently transferred property to someone named Joan Anastasia O'Neill. Desmond's office door opened. Valentina stood there in a silk robe, her expression unreadable. "You couldn't wait until morning?" she asked. "Did you know?" Desmond demanded. "Did you know who Joan really was?" Valentina closed the door carefully behind her. "What did you find?" "The O'Neill family. The crime family that was destroyed 15 years ago. Joan's last name is O'Neill. That can't be coincidence." "No," Valentina agreed quietly. "It can't. You knew. You knew who she was when we met. That's why you—" Desmond stopped, realization dawning with horrible clarity. "That's why you approached me 3 years ago. Not because you were actually interested in me. Because I was dating someone connected to the O'Neill family." Valentina sat in the chair across from his desk with the composure of someone who'd been prepared for this conversation. The O'Neill family wasn't completely destroyed. Intelligence suggested one child survived, a daughter who was smuggled out during the massacre. She disappeared, went completely off-grid. Various families have been searching for her for 15 years. And you thought Joan. We weren't certain. Joan O'Neill is a common enough name, but the timing was suspicious. A young black woman, the right age, living in the city under her real surname, like she was hiding in plain sight. Valentina's voice was matter-of-fact. "My family wanted to know if she was the missing O'Neill heir." "Your family?" Desmond repeated. "The Ashcrofts. You never told me your family was involved in." "In what?" "Legitimate business." Valentina's smile was thin. "The Ashcroft family has many interests, Desmond. Some legal, some less so. We operate in gray areas that require connections to people like Frederick Griffin, or the O'Neill family, before they were eliminated." "You used me," Desmond said, his voice flat. "You paid attention to me, seduced me, married me, all to get information about Joan?" "Initially, yes, but you proved useful in other ways. Your import business provides excellent cover for moving certain goods. Your social connections open doors. And you're handsome enough that marrying you didn't feel like a complete sacrifice." The casual cruelty of it took Desmond's breath away. "Did you have anything to do with us breaking up? With me leaving her?" Valentina's silence was enough. "How much?" Desmond asked. "How much did your family pay me to break Joan's heart?" $2 million, Valentina said. "Deposited across various accounts in small enough increments that you wouldn't notice the pattern. Framed as business profits, investment returns, lucky breaks. You thought your import company was succeeding through your own brilliance. Really, we were funding you to keep you interested in building something that would attract Joan's attention initially, then paying you to leave when we needed her isolated." Desmond's entire body went cold. "Why? Why did you need her isolated?" "Because we were trying to draw out whoever was protecting the missing O'Neill heir. We thought if we threatened Joan, or someone who looked like she could be the heir, that the protector would reveal themselves." Valentina's tone suggested she was explaining elementary concepts to a slow child. "It didn't work. Whoever was protecting her stayed hidden. So we shifted strategies." "To what?" "To marrying you to gain legitimate access to underworld circles. To using you as cover for federal investigation." Valentina stood, smoothing her robe. "I'm not just Ashcroft family, Desmond. I'm also FBI. Organized Crime Division. I've been investigating Frederick Griffin for 3 years. Your federal law enforcement? Undercover. Deep cover. So deep that even most of the Bureau doesn't know I'm active. My assignment was to infiltrate Griffin's network by any means necessary. Valentina moved toward the door. Marrying you gave me legitimate reasons to attend events like the Crimson Veil Gala, to be seen in circles where Griffin operates, to gather intelligence. And Joan? If she really is the missing O'Neill heir, then she's either Griffin's greatest asset or his greatest weakness, Valentina finished. Either way, she's leverage. Which is why her public debut last night was so significant. Griffin doesn't reveal weaknesses unless he's confident he can protect them. Which means he's stronger than we realized, or he's setting a trap. Desmond processed this, his worldview shattering and reforming into something uglier. You're going to use me to get to Joan. To get to Griffin. I'm going to use every resource available to take down a criminal empire, Valentina corrected. If that includes you, your history with Joan, and whatever residual feelings she might have. Yes, I'll use all of it. What if I refuse? What if I just what? Leave? File for divorce? Expose me? Valentina's smile was pitying. Desmond, you've been accepting money from criminal enterprises for years through me. Your business is built on illegal funding. Your success is entirely fabricated. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly how you built your empire. You'll be arrested, prosecuted, and destroyed. Or you can help me. And when this is over, I'll make sure you walk away clean with enough money to start over. That's blackmail. That's reality. Make your choice. She left him alone in his office, surrounded by evidence that everything he'd built was a lie. His business success? Funded by criminals. His marriage? A federal investigation. His decision to leave Joan? Paid manipulation. The only real thing in his life had been Joan. And he'd destroyed that relationship for money he hadn't even known he was being paid. Desmond pulled up the photos from last night's gala. Several attendees had posted on private social media, despite the supposed prohibition on photography. There was Joan beside Griffin, radiant in her expensive dress, looking at the camera with confidence that contradicted everything Desmond had believed about her. If she was really the surviving O'Neill heir, she'd been playing a role for years. The struggling artist. The woman is barely making rent. All of it a cover while she hid from whoever had massacred her family. And Desmond had been paid to break her heart during that vulnerable time. Had been paid to isolate her. Had been paid to make her feel worthless. The realization made him physically ill. He'd thought he was making a practical choice for his future. Really, he'd been a weapon wielded by people hunting a hidden princess. And now that princess was publicly beside the most dangerous man in the city, wearing her real identity like armor, looking at Desmond with eyes that said she knew exactly what he'd done. Desmond had to know the truth. Had to understand what was really happening. Which meant doing the most dangerous thing possible. Approaching Joan directly and hoping Frederick Griffin didn't kill him for it. Finding Joan proved surprisingly easy. Desmond spent 2 days researching the property records, building profiles, mapping connections. The Diamond District penthouse was Joan's primary residence, a $30 million property with security that suggested whoever lived there had enemies. But Joan also maintained a gallery space in the arts quarter. Not as an employee anymore. As the owner. O'Neill Gallery. Opened 6 months ago. Specializing in contemporary black artists and featuring works that cost more than Desmond's car. The gallery's website showed Joan as founder and curator, her bio carefully edited to avoid any mention of her real background. Just, Joan O'Neill is a lifelong arts advocate committed to elevating marginalized voices. Desmond went there on a Wednesday afternoon, gambling that Joan would be present at her own gallery. She was. Joan stood in the main exhibition space, discussing a massive painting with a potential buyer, an older white woman dripping in jewelry that suggested serious money. Joan looked professional, polished, completely comfortable negotiating prices that made Desmond's stomach turn. When the buyer left, promising to think about it, Joan turned her attention to Desmond. I wondered how long it would take you to find me, she said. 2 days. Not bad. Not great, but not bad. We need to talk. Do we? Joan walked to her office, clearly expecting him to follow. I can't imagine what we'd have to discuss. You made your feelings about me very clear 3 years ago. Her office was beautiful. Exposed brick, tall windows, furniture that managed to be both artistic and functional. Expensive without being ostentatious. Joan sat behind her desk with the easy authority of someone who owned the space and knew it. "You're the missing O'Neill heir," Desmond said without preamble. "Am I?" Joan's expression gave nothing away. The O'Neill crime family was massacred 15 years ago. One daughter survived and disappeared. You're her. That's a very interesting theory. It's not a theory. It's the truth. That's why you were hiding. Why you lived like you were broke when you clearly have family money. Why Frederick Griffin is protecting you. Protecting me? Joan's smile was sharp. Is that what you think he's doing? What else would it be? Partnership. Alliance. Mutual benefit. Joan leaned back in her chair. You're thinking in the same limited terms you always did, Desmond. Assuming I need protection. Assuming I'm some damsel who required rescue. Your entire family was killed. My father, mother, and 2 older brothers were executed by families who wanted O'Neill territory. Joan corrected, her voice steady despite the horrific content. I survived because I was at a friend's house during the initial attacks. Survived because people loyal to my family got me out before the hunters found me. Survived because I learned to become invisible. As a struggling artist. As a hidden princess learning patience. Joan's eyes were hard. You think those 3 years with you were aimless wandering? They were strategic hiding. I was 23 when my family died. Too young to reclaim our territory alone. Too traumatized to fight immediately. So I hid. Learned. Waited. And yes, worked minimum wage jobs that kept me off the radar while I healed and planned. Planned what? Revenge. Restoration. Justice. Pick your preferred term. Joan stood, moving to the window that overlooked the arts quarter. The families who killed mine thought they'd eliminated the bloodline. They divided O'Neill territory among themselves and forgot we'd ever existed. That was their mistake. And Frederick Griffin started looking into my family's massacre 7 years ago. Not out of altruism, out of strategy. The families who'd taken O'Neill territory were becoming problems for him. He wanted to destabilize them, needed leverage, did his research, and discovered the massacre wasn't as complete as everyone believed. Joan turned back to Desmond. He found me 3 years ago, right after you left, actually. The timing made Desmond's chest tight. He offered me a choice, Joan continued. Stay hidden forever, or let him train me to take back what was mine. I chose reclamation. So you've been with him for 3 years. I've been working with him for 3 years. The relationship became personal about 18 months ago. Joan's voice carried no apology. Frederick is brilliant, ruthless, and genuinely committed to helping me destroy the people who murdered my family. Turns out that's an excellent foundation for romance. Did you ever actually care about me? Or was I just convenient cover? I loved you, Joan said simply. Genuinely loved you. You were kind, ambitious, funny. You made me feel normal during a time when I desperately needed normal. I thought maybe I could have both, could stay hidden and have a real relationship. So what changed? You left me for Valentina Ashcroft. Joan's smile held no warmth. Do you know what family orchestrated the O'Neill massacre? Which family coordinated the attacks, distributed our territory, and has spent 15 years hunting for any survivors? Desmond's blood went cold. The Ashcroft family, Joan confirmed. Your wife's family. The people who paid you $2 million to break my heart and isolate me during a critical period when they were trying to draw out my protectors. I didn't know, Desmond said desperately. I swear I didn't know about the money or what they were doing. But you left anyway, Joan interrupted. Told me I wasn't ambitious enough. Wasn't practical enough. Wasn't useful enough for your grand plans. You made that choice all on your own, Desmond. The Ashcrofts just made it financially rewarding. Joan, here's what you don't know. Joan continued relentlessly. I figured out you were being paid about 6 months after you left. Frederick's investigators are thorough. We found the money trail, the Ashcroft connection, everything. I could have exposed you then. Could have told you the truth and watched you implode. Why didn't you? Because you were more useful to me as an unwitting pawn. You married Valentina, which gave me a direct line into the Ashcroft family business. Your import company, which they're using to launder money, by the way, provided intelligence on their operations. And you being publicly with Valentina meant the Ashcrofts thought they'd neutralized me as a threat. Joan's eyes were cold. I've been using you for 3 years, Desmond. Every business deal you made, every connection you built, every conversation you had with Valentina, Frederick and I knew about it. You've been my intelligence asset this entire time. The revelation hit Desmond like a physical blow. The Crimson Veil Gala, he managed. You knew I'd be there. Invited you, actually. Through carefully manipulated channels that made you think you'd earn the invitation through your own merit. Joan smiled. I wanted you to see me publicly claimed by Frederick. Wanted you to understand exactly what you'd thrown away. Petty? Perhaps. But deeply satisfying. So what happens now? You've humiliated me. Made your point. What's next? Now. Joan returned to her desk. Now the real game begins. The Ashcroft family is about to learn that the O'Neill heir they've been hunting is done hiding. Frederick and I are taking back my family's territory, and you're going to help us do it. Why would I help you? Because Valentina is FBI. She's been investigating Frederick for 3 years and plans to use you as leverage against me. She thinks I still care about you, that threatening you will make me vulnerable. Joan's voice was matter of fact. You can either work with me, help me feed Valentina false information, help me destroy the Ashcroft family and neutralize the federal investigation, or I can let Valentina arrest you for all the illegal activity you've been unwittingly involved in. Your choice. That's not a choice. That's blackmail. That's reality. Same as what Valentina offered you, I imagine. Except I'm offering you something she can't. The truth about everything, a chance to actually make things right, and maybe, forgiveness for being a weapon wielded against me. Desmond sat heavily in the chair across from Joan's desk. I really didn't know about the money. I thought I was making my own choices. I know. That's why you're still alive. Joan's voice softened fractionally. The Ashcrofts are good at manipulation. They identify targets, study weaknesses, exploit ambitions. You were their type, hungry enough to be guided, proud enough to think you were earning everything yourself. They played you perfectly, and you're playing me now. I'm offering you agency for the first time in 3 years. That's not the same thing. Joan pulled out a folder. Here's what we know about Valentina's investigation. Here's what the FBI has on Frederick. And here's how you're going to help me feed them false information that will protect Frederick while giving Valentina enough to satisfy her superiors. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. But you don't have better options. Joan slid the folder across the desk. Read it. Think about it. Make your choice. But decide quickly, Desmond. Things are about to move fast, and I need to know if you're with me or against me. Desmond took the folder with shaking hands. Everything he'd believed about the past 3 years was a lie. Everything he'd built was manipulation. Everyone he'd trusted had been using him. The only person offering him actual truth was the woman whose heart he'd broken for money he hadn't even known he was receiving. I'll read it, Desmond said. Good. We'll talk in 2 days. Don't discuss this with Valentina. Don't change your behavior around her. Act normal, scared, confused. Let her think she still controls you. Joan's voice was clinical. And Desmond, if you betray me to her, if you try to play both sides, Frederick won't be gentle when he eliminates you. Am I clear? Crystal. Desmond left the gallery with the folder hidden in his jacket and his entire worldview in ruins. Joan O'Neill wasn't his ex-girlfriend anymore. She was a Mafia princess planning a war, and he was caught between her and the people who'd orchestrated her family's massacre. Whatever he decided, someone was going to die. He just had to hope it wouldn't be him. So Desmond discovered he's been a paid pawn for 3 years, identity crisis. Learned his struggling artist ex-girlfriend is actually a hidden Mafia princess who's been using him for intelligence, trust issues. Found out his FBI wife wants to use him against Joan, who wants to use him against his wife. Loyalty confusion. And realized everyone he knows has been manipulating him except Joan, who's at least honest about the manipulation. Progress? Subscribe immediately, because what comes after this involves Desmond making the worst decision possible, Valentina discovering Joan knows about the FBI investigation, and Frederick Griffin deciding it's time to stop playing nice with the families who massacred the O'Neills. Desmond spent 2 days reading Joan's folder, and watching his marriage dissolve in real time. Valentina was preparing for something. He could see it in her increased meetings, her coded phone calls, the way she studied him when she thought he wasn't looking. She was deciding whether he was useful enough to keep alive or expendable enough to sacrifice. The folder Joan had given him was comprehensive and damning. Valentina had been investigating Frederick Griffin for 3 years under deep cover. Her assignment: infiltrate his network, identify his weaknesses, gather enough evidence to dismantle his entire organization. The Bureau had given her unlimited resources and no timeline. Whatever it took to bring Griffin down. Marrying Desmond had been a strategy. His business connections, his social climbing, his desperate desire to be important. All of it made him the perfect cover for an undercover agent who needed legitimate reasons to attend criminal gatherings. And the Ashcroft family had been using Desmond too, but for different reasons. According to Joan's intelligence, the Ashcrofts had coordinated the O'Neill massacre 15 years ago. They identified the O'Neill family as competition, orchestrated simultaneous attacks that killed Joan's parents and brothers, and seized O'Neill territory for redistribution among loyal allies. But they'd never confirmed killing Joan. The youngest O'Neill child had disappeared during the massacre, and the Ashcrofts had spent 15 years searching for her, knowing that any surviving heir could reclaim territory and expose their role in the murders. When Desmond started dating someone named Joan O'Neill, the Ashcrofts had investigated. They couldn't confirm she was the missing heir, but the possibility was enough to warrant action. So they paid Desmond to break her heart and isolate her, hoping that would either flush out her protectors or confirm she was just a normal woman with an unfortunate surname. Desmond had been a weapon, a test, a way to hurt someone the Ashcrofts thought might be their greatest threat. And he'd done it. Had broken Joan's heart, left her alone, moved on to Valentina without ever knowing he was being paid to destroy the woman he'd claimed to love. The guilt was crushing. But what haunted Desmond most was the section of Joan's folder labeled The Real Plan. Because Joan and Frederick weren't just defending against the Ashcroft family. They were planning to destroy them completely. Frederick had spent the past 3 years positioning his forces, building alliances, gathering evidence of every illegal activity the Ashcrofts had ever conducted. He had documentation of murders, bribes, trafficking operations, money laundering. Enough to bring down not just the family, but every political and criminal ally they'd cultivated. And Joan had been the bait. Her public debut at the Crimson Veil Gala hadn't been about showing off her relationship with Frederick. It had been a declaration of war. A message to the Ashcroft family that the O'Neill heir they'd been hunting had found powerful protection and was done hiding. The Ashcrofts would have to respond. Would have to try eliminating Joan before she could reclaim O'Neill territory and expose their role in the massacre. And when they made their move, Frederick would destroy them. Desmond was reading this plan for the 3rd time when Valentina entered his office without knocking. "We need to talk," she said, her voice carrying an edge he hadn't heard before. "About what?" "About you visiting Joan's gallery 2 days ago. About the folder you're currently reading. About your decision to either help me or betray me." Valentina sat across from him with casual confidence. "Did you really think I wouldn't have you followed, Desmond? That I'd just trust you to stay away from your ex-girlfriend after seeing her with Frederick Griffin?" Desmond's mouth went dry. "I was just what? Trying to understand? Trying to reconnect." Valentina's smile was cold. "You had a private meeting with Joan. She gave you intelligence. You've been reading it obsessively for 2 days. What did she offer you?" "She told me the truth about everything. About who she really is. About why you're really with me." "And you believed her? A woman who's been lying about her identity for years? Who's sleeping with a criminal to reclaim her family's illegal empire?" "She didn't lie about her identity. She protected it. There's a difference." Desmond closed the folder carefully. "And she was honest with me in a way you've never been. So yes, I believed her." Valentina's expression shifted, still controlled, but with calculation behind it. "What did she offer you to turn against me?" "The truth. Protection. A chance to actually make my own choices instead of being manipulated by everyone around me." "She's manipulating you right now," Valentina said. "Joan is working with Frederick Griffin to destroy my family. She's feeding you information designed to make you sympathetic to her cause. Everything she told you is strategically chosen to turn you into her asset. Like you turned me into your asset? Like your family paid me to hurt her without my knowledge. Valentina was quiet for a moment. You found out about the money. Jones' investigators are thorough. $2 million spread across 3 years. Framed as business success. I thought I'd earned everything. Really, your family was paying me to be a weapon against the woman I loved. It was necessary. We had to determine if she was the O'Neill heir and neutralize the threat she represented. She was 25 years old and mourning her murdered family. What threat did she represent to anyone? The threat of reclamation, of exposure, of revenge. Valentina leaned forward. The O'Neill family was destroyed because they challenged the established order, because they tried to consolidate power that threatened every other family in the city. My family did what was necessary to maintain stability. Your family orchestrated a massacre and has spent 15 years hunting a survivor. Yes, and if you help Joan, you're signing your own death warrant. Because the Ashcroft family doesn't tolerate traitors. Valentina's voice was matter of fact. Help me, and I'll make sure you're protected when this is over. Help Joan, and you'll die alongside her when my family eliminates the last O'Neill. She has Frederick Griffin protecting her. Griffin is powerful, but he's not invincible. He's made enemies. The families who took O'Neill territory won't give it back without a fight. And the FBI is preparing to move against him within the month. Valentina pulled out her own folder. Here's what you don't know. I've been building a case that will put Griffin in federal prison for the rest of his life. I have evidence, testimony, financial records, everything I need to dismantle his entire organization. And Joan will be arrested as an accessory. She's been working with Griffin for 3 years. That makes her complicit in everything he's done. Valentina's smile was thin. So make your choice, Desmond. Help me arrest the criminals or go down with them. Those are your only options. Desmond looked at the 2 folders on his desk, Joan's and Valentina's. 2 versions of truth. 2 paths forward. Both of them leading to destruction, just for different people. I need time to think, he said. You have 24 hours. Then I need your decision. Valentina stood. And Desmond, choose wisely. Because this isn't a game where you get to play both sides. You're either with me or against me. There's no middle ground. She left him alone with his choice. Desmond pulled out his phone and stared at Joan's number, which she'd included in her folder. He could call her, warn her about the FBI's timeline, help her and Frederick prepare for the coming arrests. Or he could work with Valentina, help the FBI dismantle Griffin's organization, watch Joan get arrested for crimes she'd committed while trying to reclaim her family's legacy. Either way, someone he'd cared about would be destroyed. The question was, which destruction could he live with? Desmond made his choice. He called Joan. I'm in, he said when she answered. Tell me what you need me to do. Through the phone, he could hear Joan's satisfaction. Good choice. Come to the Diamond District penthouse tomorrow at noon. Frederick wants to meet properly. And Desmond? Don't tell Valentina you've chosen sides. Let her think you're still considering. We need her confident and off balance when we make our move. What move? The one that's going to destroy the Ashcroft family and neutralize the FBI investigation in one operation. Joan's voice carried a dark promise. Tomorrow, you'll learn what real power looks like. Be ready. She hung up before he could respond. Desmond sat in his office, surrounded by lies and folders and choices that would define the rest of his life. He'd chosen Joan, had chosen revenge over law, had chosen the woman he'd betrayed over the wife who'd used him. Now he just had to survive the consequences. The Diamond District penthouse was everything Desmond had imagined and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Modern furniture that managed to be both comfortable and clearly expensive. Art on the walls that Desmond recognized from galleries that didn't list prices because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. This was Joan's home, Joan's world, and it looked nothing like the studio apartment where Desmond had known her. Frederick Griffin answered the door personally, which was both surprising and intimidating. Desmond, Frederick said, his tone neutral. Come in. Joan's expecting you. He led Desmond through the penthouse to an office that overlooked the city skyline. Joan sat behind a massive desk, dressed in business casual that somehow made her look more powerful than formal wear would have. Thank you for coming, Joan said. I know this isn't easy. You're asking me to help you destroy my wife and her entire family. I'm asking you to help me get justice for my murdered parents and brothers, Joan corrected. The fact that your wife is part of the family that killed them is unfortunate for your marriage, but doesn't change what needs to happen. Frederick moved to stand beside Joan's desk, his hand resting on her shoulder in casual intimacy that spoke of years of partnership. Up close, their dynamic was clearer. They weren't just lover and protector. They were equals, strategic partners who'd built something together. Valentina told you about the FBI investigation, Frederick said. It wasn't a question. She has evidence. Testimony. Financial records. She's planning to arrest you within the month. We know. We've known since she started gathering evidence 2 years ago. Frederick's smile was cold. Your wife isn't as covert as she thinks. We've been feeding her information, controlling what she finds, building a case that looks legitimate but won't actually hold up in court. How? By making sure every piece of evidence can be explained as legitimate business. By ensuring her witnesses are people we control who'll recant testimony when subpoenaed. By letting her think she's building a case while we're really building a trap. Frederick pulled up files on a tablet and showed Desmond. When Valentina tries to arrest me, her entire investigation will collapse. The evidence will be inadmissible. The witnesses will disappear or recant. And the FBI will have nothing except an agent who spent 3 years on a failed operation. That'll destroy her career. That's the idea, Jones said. Valentina used you, Desmond. Used our relationship to gain access to criminal networks. She doesn't deserve your loyalty. And the Ashcroft family? What happens to them? That's where you come in. Joan pulled up different files. We need evidence of the Ashcroft family's role in the O'Neill massacre. We have circumstantial connections, testimony from people who are now dead, financial records that suggest coordination. But we need something definitive. Something that proves they planned and executed the attacks. And you think I can get that evidence? You're married to an Ashcroft. You live in their house, attend their family gatherings, have access to their private spaces. Frederick's voice was steady. If evidence exists, it's likely in the Ashcroft family estate. We need you to find it. That's breaking and entering. That's theft. That's justice. Joan corrected. And you owe me this, Desmond. You took their money to break my heart. You helped them isolate me when I was vulnerable. This is your chance to actually make things right. The guilt was effective. Desmond had spent 3 years thinking he'd made a practical choice to leave Joan. Learning he'd been paid to hurt her, paid by the family that had massacred her parents, made everything worse. What exactly am I looking for? Communications from 15 years ago. Financial records showing payments to the people who carried out the attacks. Plans, documents, anything that proves the Ashcrofts coordinated the massacre. Joan showed him examples. It'll likely be in Randolph Ashcroft's office, Valentina's father. He was the family head when my family was killed. If anyone kept records, it would be him. He's still alive? Very much so. And still running Ashcroft operations, though officially he's retired. Frederick's tone suggested Randolph's retirement was more facade than reality. Valentina reports to him, takes orders from him. Everything she's doing with the FBI investigation has his approval. So she's not actually committed to law enforcement. She's committed to her family. Now you're understanding how this works. Joan's voice was dry. Families like the Ashcrofts use legal systems when convenient and ignore them when not. Valentina's FBI position is just another tool for protecting family interests. Desmond processed this. When do you need me to get the evidence? This weekend. The Ashcroft family is having their quarterly gathering at the estate. You and Valentina are expected to attend. Joan pulled up architectural plans of the estate. Security will be focused on the event, not on interior monitoring. That's your window. How do I access Randolph's office without being seen? You tell Valentina you're not feeling well and need to lie down. Ask to use a private room away from the gathering. Once you're alone, you access Randolph's office. It's on the 2nd floor, East Wing. We'll provide you with tools to bypass the locks and copy any digital files you find. And if I get caught, you improvise. Say you got lost. Say you were looking for a bathroom. Say anything except the truth. Frederick's voice carried no sympathy. You're the one who chose this path, Desmond. Now you have to walk it. Joan handed him a small case. Everything you need is here. Lockpicks, digital copying device, instructions for avoiding security cameras. Study it. Memorize it. Don't bring it to the estate. We'll have someone pass it to you once you arrive. Who? A server. Someone who works these family gatherings regularly and won't draw attention. Joan's tone suggested the conversation was ending. Desmond, I need you to understand something. If you betray us, if you tell Valentina what we're planning, Frederick won't just kill you. He'll make sure everyone knows you were working with criminals against federal law enforcement. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your business will collapse. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison or hiding. Are we clear? Crystal. Good. Joan stood, moving around the desk to face him directly. You asked me earlier if I ever really cared about you. I did. Genuinely. You were kind and funny, and you made me feel normal when my entire world was violence and loss. I loved you, Desmond. Which is why I'm giving you this chance to make things right instead of just killing you for being a weapon against me. That's generous, Desmond said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. It is, actually. Most people who hurt me the way you did don't get second chances. Joan's eyes were hard. Don't waste this one. Frederick escorted Desmond out, and at the penthouse door, the Mafia boss spoke quietly. Joan has a soft spot for you despite everything. I don't. If you get her hurt, if your incompetence or betrayal puts her in danger, I will personally ensure you die badly. Am I clear? Yes. Good. Get the evidence. Help us destroy the family that massacred hers. Do that, and maybe you'll earn forgiveness. Fail, and you'll just be another casualty in a war you were never equipped to survive. Desmond left the penthouse with a case of tools and a weight on his chest that made breathing difficult. He was committed now. Had chosen Joan's revenge over Valentina's investigation, had agreed to steal evidence from the family that employed him, married him, used him. The Ashcroft quarterly gathering was in 3 days. 3 days to prepare for the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. 3 days before he either helped Joan get justice or got caught and destroyed everyone he'd allied with. Desmond went home to the penthouse he shared with Valentina and tried to act normal. But normal was impossible when you'd just committed to betraying your wife to help your ex-girlfriend destroy her entire family. The Ashcroft estate was exactly as imposing as Desmond expected. 20 acres of manicured grounds, a mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from European aristocracy, and enough security to protect a small country. The quarterly family gathering brought together Ashcrofts from across the country, cousins, business partners, allies who'd married into the family or proven useful enough to be granted access. Desmond arrived with Valentina in her Mercedes, both of them dressed formally for an event that was part family reunion, part business summit, part display of power. Remember, Valentina said as they approached the gates, don't wander off alone. Don't ask questions about family business. And absolutely don't go anywhere you're not explicitly invited. I remember, Desmond replied, his heart hammering. He was about to break every one of those rules. The gathering was held in the mansion's great hall, a massive space that could accommodate 200 people comfortably. Desmond recognized some faces from the Crimson Veil Gala, others from business functions, still others from Valentina's carefully curated social media. Randolph Ashcroft held court at the hall's center, surrounded by family members seeking his attention and approval. At 73, he was still sharp, still commanding, still very clearly in control despite his supposed retirement. This was the man who'd ordered Joan's family massacred, who'd paid Desmond to break her heart, who Valentina ultimately answered to despite her FBI credentials. Desmond watched him laugh at some joke, accept a drink from a server, casually command the room with the ease of someone who'd never been denied anything. And he hated him. An hour into the gathering, Desmond told Valentina he wasn't feeling well. I think I ate something bad at lunch. Can I lie down somewhere quiet? Valentina's eyes narrowed slightly. She was trained to detect lies, and Desmond was only mediocre at telling them, but she nodded. Ask one of the staff to show you to a guest room. Don't bother anyone. I'll check on you in an hour. Desmond found a server, a young woman he didn't recognize, and asked for directions to a quiet room. Of course, sir. This way. She led him through hallways lined with expensive art and family portraits, up a grand staircase to the second floor. But instead of taking him to the guest wing, she guided him toward the east wing. "You're the contact?" Desmond asked quietly. "Fifth door on the left," the server said without changing her pleasant expression. "You have 20 minutes before the security rotation changes. The tools you need are in the bathroom cabinet. Good luck." She left him alone in the hallway. Desmond found the fifth door, locked, as expected. The lockpick set from Joan was sophisticated enough that he managed to bypass it in under 2 minutes, which was both impressive and terrifying. Randolph's office was everything Desmond expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with books that probably cost more than Desmond's car. A massive desk that suggested power and authority. And somewhere in this room, evidence of the O'Neill massacre. Desmond started with the desk drawers, locked, but the lockpicks worked on those too. He found financial records, business contracts, personal correspondence. Nothing about the O'Neills. The file cabinets were next. These were more promising, organized by year, with sections labeled for various family operations. Desmond found the section for 15 years ago and started photographing documents with the digital copying device Joan had provided. Financial transfers to known assassins. Communications between Randolph and other family heads about the O'Neill problem. Plans for dividing O'Neill territory post-massacre. This was it. This was the evidence Joan needed. Desmond was photographing the final document when he heard voices in the hallway. "Need to discuss the FBI investigation. Valentina's timeline is accelerating." Randolph's voice, right outside the office. Desmond's blood went ice cold. He shoved the documents back into the file cabinet, closed it as quietly as possible, and looked desperately for somewhere to hide. The desk? Too obvious. Behind the curtains? Too cliché. The bathroom attached to the office? Maybe. Desmond slipped into the bathroom and locked the door just as he heard the office door open. "Told her to maintain cover for at least another month," Randolph was saying. "We need Frederick Griffin confident before we move against him." And the O'Neill girl. A second voice Desmond didn't recognize. "Joan? She's irrelevant. Griffin thinks she's an asset, but really she's his greatest vulnerability. When we eliminate her, he'll fall apart. Men always do when you take away their favorite toy." Desmond's hands clenched into fists. "Valentina says the girl has been meeting with Desmond Cartwright. Her ex-boyfriend. Cartwright is irrelevant too. Useful for accessing criminal circles, but disposable once the investigation concludes. Valentina knows to tie up loose ends." Through the bathroom door, Desmond listened to the two men casually discuss eliminating Joan and killing him like they were planning a business merger. "When do we move?" "Next week. The FBI will arrest Griffin on fabricated charges. During the chaos, our people will eliminate Joan and make it look like gang violence. Griffin's organization will collapse without his leadership, and we'll absorb what's left of his territory. And Valentina will be reassigned. Her usefulness as undercover has expiration dates. We'll extract her before the investigation becomes too public, give her a new assignment, let her continue serving the family." They continued talking for another 10 minutes while Desmond stood frozen in the bathroom, listening to plans for multiple murders delivered with the casual indifference of people who'd done this before. Finally, they left. Desmond waited 5 more minutes to be sure, then slipped out of the bathroom, out of the office, back into the hallway. His 20-minute window was long gone. Security would have changed rotations. He needed to get back to the gathering before someone noticed his extended absence. The server who'd guided him earlier appeared at the end of the hallway, gesturing urgently. "This way. Quickly." She led him through a servant's corridor that bypassed the main hallways, depositing him near the guest wing. "Did you get what you needed?" she asked. "Yes, and more." Desmond's voice was shaking. "They're planning to kill Joan next week." "I know. I heard." The server's expression was grim. "That's why we needed the evidence now. Joan and Frederick are accelerating their timeline. Everything happens this weekend. Everything. The end of the Ashcroft family. The exposure of their crimes. Justice for the O'Neills." The server smiled coldly. "You just provided the final piece we needed. Thank you for your service, Mr. Cartwright." She disappeared before Desmond could ask more questions. He made his way back to the Great Hall, found Valentina networking with cousins, and told her he was feeling better. "Good," she said, her attention already back on her conversation. "Don't disappear again." Desmond spent the rest of the gathering pretending everything was normal while his mind raced. Joan and Frederick were planning to move this weekend. The Ashcrofts were planning to move next week. And Desmond was caught in the middle with evidence that could destroy one side or the other depending on who he gave it to. Except he'd already chosen sides, had already committed to Joan's revenge. Now he just had to survive the war that was about to erupt. So Desmond successfully stole evidence from the most dangerous crime family in the city, spy skills unlocked. Discovered his wife's family is planning to murder Joan next week. Marriage counseling won't fix this. Learned he's considered a loose and to be eliminated, self-esteem destroyed, and found out everything is happening this weekend, which is in approximately 48 hours. No pressure. Subscribe now, because what comes after this involves the Ashcroft family learning Joan has been playing them for 3 years, Frederick Griffin finally unleashing the violence everyone's been anticipating, and Desmond discovering that choosing sides in a mafia war means you might not survive to regret your choice. Everything happened fast. Desmond delivered the evidence to Joan Saturday evening. She reviewed it with Frederick while Desmond watched, both of them silent and focused as they cataloged exactly what Randolph had kept in his files. "This is perfect," Joan finally said. "Financial transfers, communications, plans for territory division. This proves the Ashcrofts coordinated my family's massacre." "Can you use it legally?" Desmond asked. "We're not using it legally," Frederick replied. "We're using it as leverage, as threat, as the final piece that makes the Ashcroft family understand they're finished." "What are you planning?" Joan and Frederick exchanged a look that communicated years of partnership and planning. "Tomorrow night, there's a meeting of the major families," Joan explained. "Quarterly summit at the Meridian Hotel. Every family head attends. It's where territories are negotiated, alliances are formed, conflicts are resolved. Neutral ground, like the Crimson Veil Gala. We're going to present this evidence at that meeting," Frederick continued, "in front of every major family. We'll expose the Ashcrofts' role in the O'Neill massacre, their use of a federal agent for illegal operations, their plans to eliminate Joan and absorb my territory. They'll deny it. They'll try. But we'll have documentation, witness testimony from people the Ashcrofts thought were loyal, and physical evidence, including the files you photographed." Joan's voice was steady. "By the time we're done, the Ashcroft family will be pariahs. No allies. No protection. Completely exposed. And then what? They'll try to kill you." "They'll try," Frederick agreed. "That's why we're prepared for war." Sunday arrived with surreal normalcy. Desmond went through his usual routine, breakfast with Valentina, reviewing business emails, pretending nothing had changed. Valentina was tense. He could feel it through her controlled movements, her distracted responses, the way she kept checking her phone. "Something wrong?" Desmond asked. "Just work. The investigation is reaching critical points." She looked at him carefully. "I might need to travel this week. Probably for several days." "Where?" "I can't tell you that. Classified FBI business." But through the evasion, Desmond understood. She was preparing to arrest Frederick. Was lining up resources, coordinating with her superiors, getting ready for the operation the Ashcrofts had been planning. Except Joan and Frederick were going to move first. The quarterly summit started at 8 p.m. Desmond wasn't invited. These gatherings were for family heads only, the true power players of the criminal underworld. But Joan had arranged for him to be nearby, at a hotel across the street, in a room with a view of the Meridian's entrance, where he could watch everything unfold. "Why do you want me here?" Desmond had asked when she explained the arrangement. "Because you should see this," Joan replied. "You should watch the family that used you get destroyed. You've earned that much." So Desmond sat in a hotel room watching luxury cars arrive, security details fan out, and the city's criminal elite gather for their quarterly negotiation session. He saw Randolph Ashcroft arrive with an entourage. Saw other family heads he recognized from the Crimson Veil Gala. Saw Frederick Griffin arrive with security that suggested he was anticipating trouble. And saw Joan arrive separately, dressed in black that made her look like an avenging angel, walking into that hotel with the confidence of someone about to reclaim a kingdom. What happened next? Desmond learned later through news reports and Joan's own description. The summit started normally. Families negotiating territories, resolving disputes, forming alliances. Standard criminal business conducted with formal protocols. Then Joan stood and requested the floor. "My name is Joan Anastasia O'Neill," she announced to the assembled families. "Daughter of Jonathan and Amara O'Neill. Sister to Julian and Marcus O'Neill. The last surviving member of a family that was massacred 15 years ago by coordinated attacks authorized by this assembly." The room went silent. Randolph tried to interrupt, but Joan continued relentlessly. "For 15 years, the families in this room have operated under the fiction that the O'Neills committed treason, that we challenged the established order and deserved elimination. But I have evidence, financial records, communications, planning documents, that prove the Ashcroft family fabricated the treason charges to justify seizing our territory." She presented the evidence methodically. Every document Desmond had photographed. Every financial transfer Randolph had authorized. Every communication proving the Ashcrofts had orchestrated the massacre. "The Ashcrofts have spent 15 years hunting me," Joan continued. "They paid operatives to break my heart and isolate me. They infiltrated federal law enforcement to use against their enemies. They plan to eliminate me next week and absorb Frederick Griffin's territory. All of this is documented. All of this is provable." Randolph stood, his face purple with rage. "This is fabrication. Lies designed to what? Reclaim what was stolen from my family." Joan's voice cut through his bluster. "I'm invoking right of restoration. Under the laws that govern this assembly, a surviving heir can reclaim their family's territory if they prove the original seizure was unjust. I've just provided that proof." The families erupted into argument. Some supporting Joan, others defending the Ashcrofts, still others trying to figure out how this affected their own positions. It was chaos, and in the chaos, Frederick's security moved into position. Because Joan hadn't just come to expose the Ashcrofts. She'd come to end them. Randolph, seeing his empire crumbling, made a desperate choice. He ordered his security to eliminate Joan right there in the summit, violating every rule about neutral ground. It was the excuse Frederick had been waiting for. The fight was brutal and fast. Ashcroft security against Griffin's forces, while family heads evacuated or took cover or tried to stay neutral. When the shooting stopped, Randolph was dead. His security detail was dead, and the Ashcroft family's power structure had collapsed. Joan stood in the center of the carnage, surrounded by Frederick's protection, addressing the surviving families. "The Ashcrofts are finished," she said. "Their territory is now mine by right of restoration. Any family that challenges this will face the same fate Randolph just did." Am I clear? No one challenged her. The O'Neill family had returned, and everyone who'd profited from their massacre understood that the bill had finally come due. Desmond watched emergency services arrive at the Meridian from his hotel window, watched families evacuate, watched Frederick and Joan leave together, surrounded by security, untouchable. His phone rang. "Joan, it's done," she said. "The Ashcrofts are destroyed. Randolph is dead, and I've reclaimed everything that was stolen from my family. And Valentina is currently being arrested by her FBI superiors for unauthorized operations and corruption. Turns out when you use federal resources for family business and your family business just got publicly exposed as criminal conspiracy, the Bureau takes that personally. So she's finished too. Completely. Her career is over. Her family is dismantled. And you're free from both of them." Joan's voice softened slightly. "Come to the penthouse tomorrow. We need to discuss your future." She hung up before Desmond could ask what that meant. He sat alone in the hotel room, watching the aftermath of a war he'd helped start, and tried to figure out what he felt. Relief? Joan was alive and victorious. Guilt? He'd helped destroy his wife's entire family. Fear? What role did he play now that the war was over? Desmond didn't have answers, but he'd find out tomorrow, when the woman he'd betrayed would decide if he deserved forgiveness or just another form of punishment. The Diamond District penthouse looked different in daylight, less intimidating. More like an actual home instead of a fortress where plans for revenge were hatched. Joan answered the door herself, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that made her look younger, more like the woman Desmond remembered from 3 years ago. "Come in," she said. "Coffee, please." They sat in the living room with the morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, drinking expensive coffee, and Desmond tried to figure out how to start this conversation. Joan saved him the trouble. "I'm not going to kill you," she said. "In case you were wondering. Frederick thought I should, but I told him no." "That's good to know. You helped me get the evidence I needed. You betrayed Valentina and her family despite the personal cost. You chose my revenge over your own security." Joan sipped her coffee. "That deserves acknowledgement." "I owed you," Desmond said quietly, "for being paid to break your heart, for being a weapon against you, for 3 years of being used to hurt you without even knowing. You did, and now we're even." Joan set down her coffee. "Desmond, I need you to understand something. I loved you 3 years ago. Genuinely loved you. You were kind and funny, and you made me feel normal when my world was violence and loss. But you also chose to leave me. Choose Valentina. Choose what you thought was a better future. I was being manipulated. You were being paid. That's not the same as having no choice." Joan's voice was firm, but not cruel. "The Ashcrofts made leaving me financially rewarding. But you still made the decision. You still decided I wasn't good enough for your ambitions. I know. And I'm sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't change what happened. Doesn't undo 3 years of you building a life with my family's killers while I was planning revenge." Joan leaned forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away. I'm giving you your freedom. Your business will continue operating. I've made sure the illegal aspects are cleaned up so you won't be prosecuted. You'll have enough money to start over somewhere else. And you'll never contact me again. That's it. I just leave. That's it. You helped me get justice. Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices." Joan's expression was unreadable. "You picked Valentina over me. You built a life with people who murdered my family. You don't get to just walk back into my world and pretend those choices didn't matter. What if I want to make things right? What if I want? Want what, Desmond? Want me back? Want to be part of my life now that I'm powerful and connected?" Joan's laugh was bitter. "I'm with Frederick. I love him. He protected me when I was vulnerable, trained me when I was weak, helped me reclaim my birthright when I was ready. He's my partner in every way that matters. There's no room for you in this life." The words hurt more than Desmond expected. "So I just leave. Start over. Pretend the past 3 years didn't happen. You remember the past 3 years. You live with the choices you made. But you do it somewhere else, building something that isn't connected to me or my family or the criminal world that got your wife arrested and her father killed." Joan stood, clearly ending the conversation. "I'm giving you freedom, Desmond. Take it. Build something legitimate. Find someone who actually wants you instead of just using you. Be better than you were. And if I don't want to leave, if I want to stay in, then Frederick will kill you." Joan's voice was matter-of-fact. "Because he's been very patient with my ex-boyfriend who betrayed me, helped destroy my family's enemies, and now needs to disappear before he becomes a liability. Don't test that patience." Desmond stood, understanding this was final. "For what it's worth, I really am sorry. About all of it. About leaving you. About being used against you. About not seeing what was right in front of me. I know you are. But sorry isn't enough to undo damage or rebuild trust." Joan walked him to the door. "Goodbye, Desmond. Have a good life. Make better choices than you made with me." She closed the door before he could respond. Desmond stood in the hallway of the Diamond District building, understanding with perfect clarity that he'd just been dismissed from Joan's life permanently. No second chances. No redemption arc. No romantic reunion where they overcame the past and built something new. Just, "You helped me when I needed it. Now leave and don't come back." He should have felt relieved. He was alive, financially stable, free from Valentina and the Ashcrofts and the criminal world that had been using him. Instead, he felt empty. Because the only person who'd ever been honest with him, who'd told him the truth about manipulation and choices and consequences, had just told him to leave and never return. Desmond went back to the penthouse he'd shared with Valentina and found it empty. She'd been arrested 2 days ago. Her belongings were gone, seized as evidence or removed by remaining Ashcroft family members. He was alone. He packed what belongings were actually his. Not many, he realized. Most of his life had been provided by Valentina, funded by her family, built on foundations that had crumbled the moment Joan exposed everything. Within a week, Desmond had left the city. He started over in a smaller town, using the money Joan had ensured he could access, building a legitimate business that had nothing to do with criminal enterprises or mafia connections. He dated, built friendships, lived a normal life. And every time he saw news about Frederick Griffin's expanding empire or heard whispers about the O'Neill family's restoration, he thought about Joan, about what he'd lost, about what he'd traded for practicality and ambition, about the woman he'd left who'd become a queen while he'd remained exactly what he'd always been, mediocre. Joan's life, meanwhile, flourished. She and Frederick consolidated territory, built alliances, became one of the most powerful couples in the criminal underworld. The O'Neill name was restored. Joan's parents and brothers were publicly memorialized. Justice, as much as it existed in their world, was served. And Joan was exactly where she'd always been meant to be, ruling beside someone who saw her as an equal, not as someone to protect or diminish. 6 months after Desmond left the city, he saw a news article about a charity gala for underprivileged artists. The event was hosted by Joan O'Neill and Frederick Griffin. The photo showed them together, Joan in an elegant gown, Frederick in a custom suit, both of them looking like power incarnate. And in Joan's smile, in the way she looked at Frederick, in the confidence radiating from her, Desmond saw everything he'd lost. Not because it was taken from him, because he'd thrown it away. The story ended not with revenge or justice or restoration, but with a man understanding, too late, that some choices can't be unmade. And some people, once you lose them, stay lost forever. 1 year later, the invitation arrived at Desmond's modest apartment in his new city without warning. Heavy cardstock, elegant script, formal request for his presence at a wedding. Joan O'Neill and Frederick Griffin requested the pleasure of his company at their marriage ceremony. Desmond stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out why they'd invite him. Cruelty? A final reminder of what he'd lost? Or something else? He almost didn't go, almost threw the invitation away and pretended he'd never received it. But curiosity won. The wedding was held in the same converted cathedral where the Crimson Veil Gala had been hosted. Full circle from where Desmond had first seen Joan with Frederick, first understood how completely he'd misjudged everything. Desmond arrived early, dressed in his best suit, and found himself among several hundred guests who represented the city's power structure. Criminal families, legitimate business leaders, politicians who'd learned to coexist with the underworld. He saw faces from the Quarterly Summit, survivors of the Ashcroft Purge, people who'd watched Joan reclaim her birthright and understood exactly what she was capable of. The ceremony was beautiful, traditional, and elegant. Joan walked down the aisle alone, no one to give her away because her family was dead, and Frederick met her halfway, acknowledging that they'd come to this moment as equals. Their vows were personal, clearly written together, and spoke of partnership, trust, and building something that honored the past while creating a better future. Desmond watched from the back, anonymous in the crowd, and felt the weight of everything he'd lost. At the reception, Joan found him. She looked radiant in her wedding dress, happy in a way he'd never seen when they were together. "You came," she said. "I wasn't sure you actually wanted me here. I wanted you to see this, to understand what you gave up." Joan's voice wasn't cruel, just honest. 3 years ago, you left me because I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't practical enough, wasn't useful enough for your plans. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. Good. You should. Joan glanced back at Frederick, who was talking with Salvatore Delacroix. "I'm happy, Desmond. Genuinely happy. And part of that happiness comes from knowing I didn't need you to become this person. I was always capable of this. You just couldn't see it. I see it now. Too late. But you see it." Joan smiled, not vindictive, just satisfied. "I hope you find someone who makes you as happy as Frederick makes me. I hope you build something real instead of something paid for by criminals. I hope you become the person you thought you were instead of the person you actually were." Is that forgiveness? That's closure. Joan touched his arm briefly. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the evidence that helped me destroy my family's killers. Thank you for finally choosing correctly, even though it was too late for us." She returned to Frederick, who pulled her close and kissed her with the possessive confidence of someone who'd won everything. Desmond left the reception early. He'd been invited to witness Joan's happiness, to see what real partnership looked like, to understand that she'd never needed him. She'd just been kind enough to let him think he mattered. The truth was humbling and devastating. Desmond drove back to his apartment in his new city, his modest life, his legitimate business that would never amount to the empire he dreamed of building. And he finally understood what Joan had been trying to tell him all along. Sometimes the person you think is holding you back is actually the best thing in your life. Sometimes practical choices are just cowardice wearing a professional mask. And sometimes you don't realize what you had until you see them thriving without you. Joan O'Neill had become a queen. Frederick Griffin had become a king. And Desmond Cartwright had become a footnote in someone else's success story. The ex-boyfriend who'd made every wrong choice and lived long enough to regret it. The end. The end. A man brought his trophy wife to an exclusive criminal gala thinking he'd finally impressed the right people, then watched his struggling artist ex-girlfriend get publicly claimed by the most feared mafia boss in 3 states, while wearing diamonds worth more than his entire net worth. Desmond discovered he didn't just randomly leave Joan 3 years ago. He was paid $2 million by the family that massacred her parents to break her heart and isolate her. His new wife is an undercover FBI agent who married him for access to criminal networks. And his ex was never actually a struggling artist, but a hidden mafia princess playing the long game while planning the most spectacular revenge in underworld history. This is what happens when you choose ambition over love, when practical decisions are really just cowardice wearing expensive suits, and when the person you left for being unambitious becomes literal royalty while you become a cautionary tale about terrible life choices. Subscribe because next week's story features a woman who wakes up in a hospital with no memory of the past year, discovers she's apparently married to her sworn enemy, and slowly realizes she wasn't in an accident. Someone deliberately erased her memories because she uncovered a conspiracy that goes straight to the top of the criminal empire she thought she was investigating. It's going to be absolutely devastating. Real talk. Did Desmond make the right choice helping Joan destroy the Ashcroft family? Or should he have stayed loyal to Valentina despite discovering she'd been using him? A. Right choice. He owed Joan justice after being weaponized against her, even if it meant betraying his wife. B. Wrong choice. He should have worked with Valentina and law enforcement instead of choosing criminal revenge. C. Both. Helping Joan was morally right but practically dangerous, and he's lucky he survived. D. None of this matters because watching your ex upgrade so spectacularly that your current wife looks like a downgrade is the universe's most brutal karma delivery system. Drop your answer below. Bonus question: was Joan right to completely cut Desmond out of her life after he helped her? Or should she have given him a second chance since he finally chose correctly? Another question: did Frederick actually love Joan? Or was she just strategically useful for reclaiming O'Neill territory, and he happened to develop feelings along the way? Sound off in the comments. This story proved that sometimes being left is the best thing that ever happened to you. Sometimes the struggling artist was actually royalty in hiding, and sometimes revenge is a dish best served at a gala in front of everyone who underestimated you. True power isn't about never being knocked down. It's about getting back up wearing designer clothes and dating someone who could have your ex eliminated with a phone call. See you next week for more spectacular revenge plots, more hidden identities revealed at the worst possible moments, and more proof that choosing the practical option over your actual soulmate has consequences that last forever.